My name is Martha Heron. I am 64 years old. The rain had been falling since dawn, the kind that never quite ends in Portland's soft gray persistent. I was sitting at the kitchen table sorting receipts for next month's property taxes when my phone buzzed beside the coffee cup. One short vibration, then another. I wiped my fingers on a napkin and picked it up, expecting a message from the pharmacy or my neighbor about the recycling bins. Instead, the screen lit with a text from my daughter Riley. Send me $2,800 for prom. No greeting. No, please. Just a command wrapped in capital letters. For a moment, I thought it must be a mistake. Riley was 17, smart, and more than capable of working a weekend shift at the bookstore she loved. $2,800 was not a prom budget. It was nearly my monthly mortgage. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed the reflection of my own face, dull and older than I expected. I typed slowly. Earn it yourself. Then I set the phone face down and finished my coffee, pretending it was just another morning. The day passed in small, predictable chores. Laundry, a trip to the post office, a long walk under my umbrella. Yet something about that message clung to me like damp air. Riley had been distant lately, speaking to me in quick texts and sighs. We used to share everything: recipes, weekend plans, little jokes about the neighbors' cats. Lately, our conversations had turned into requests. Can you transfer a few hundred? I'll pay you back next week. The next week never came. By evening, I was preparing soup when the phone buzzed again. This time, there were two messages stacked on top of each other. The first, pay or get out of this family. The second came from a number I knew as well as my own, my mother's. Your daughter just told us you refused to help. Pay the money, Martha. Don't embarrass us. Another followed from my father, always the quieter one. Do the right thing. I sank into the nearest chair. The wooden edge pressed against my knees, anchoring me to the moment. The kitchen light flickered once and steadied. I read the messages again, each one colder than the last. Riley had told my parents I'd refused her. She had turned a private conversation into a family verdict. For years, I had been the dependable one, the accountant of the family, the fixer. After my husband died 15 years ago, I learned how to manage everyone's chaos with calm. When my parents' roof leaked, I paid the contractor. When Riley wanted art lessons, I found a way. It had always been easier to give than to argue, but the words on the screen were different. They weren't a request. They were a declaration. Pay or lose us. The soup boiled over. I turned off the stove, wiped the counter, and tried to steady my breath. The house was too quiet, now filled only with the hum of the refrigerator and the faint tick of the clock above the sink. By 9, the rain had stopped. I carried my phone to the living room, set it on the coffee table, and sat for a long time without touching it. The messages waited there like open mouths, still demanding answers. I could almost hear my mother's voice from decades earlier. A good daughter doesn't refuse family. But I wasn't just a daughter anymore. I was a woman who had built a life alone, who had paid every bill with hands that still smelled faintly of ink and paper. And somehow, without noticing, I had become everyone's safety net. I picked up the phone one last time. The messages glowed against the dark. I scrolled through old bank transfers, small amounts here and there, all in the name of helping. Then I stood, walked to my desk, and opened my laptop. My reflection stared back from the black screen, tired but steady. If love had become an invoice, maybe it was time to stop paying. When the screen lit up, my fingers hovered over the keyboard. I did not yet know what I would cancel, only that something had to begin, or everything would keep repeating. Outside, the rain started again. Inside, I pressed the first key. I woke before dawn, the kind of morning where the air feels heavy even inside the house. My laptop was still open on the dining table, its blue light faint against the gray window. I hadn't slept much. Every time I closed my eyes, the words from last night repeated, pay or get out of this family. I sat down and opened the banking app again. Rows of numbers waited like a quiet confession. Transfers going back years, small at first, then larger. I clicked through each one, reading the notes I had written to myself. Groceries, utilities, emergency. It all sounded so reasonable, so kind. Then the pattern appeared month after month, year after year. Birthdays, school trips, rent gaps. It wasn't generosity anymore. It was maintenance. I scrolled further until I reached the oldest records the year after my husband, Paul, died. That first transfer was for Riley's art camp, the one she'd begged to attend. I remembered his voice, then low and tired from the hospital bed. "You fix everything by paying for it," he had said, his hand squeezing mine. "But you can't buy peace, Martha." At the time, I thought he was wrong. Money had been our language of safety. I'd grown up in a house where silence followed unpaid bills, where my parents fought through closed doors about debts and shame. I promised myself my own family would never know that fear, and for years they didn't. Because I paid. The cursor blinked at the bottom of the screen, the balance number smaller than I remembered. I rubbed my eyes and clicked into the joint account I'd opened with my parents years ago for emergencies, we had said. The last withdrawal was $5,000 labeled home repair. Before that, travel fund. Before that, Riley's tuition. The list went on until I couldn't tell where one favor ended and another began. The phone buzzed beside me. A text from my mother. "Did you think about what I said? Riley's upset." "Just send it, Martha." "She's your daughter." I stared at the words until my chest tightened. Then another message appeared. "Family is all you have left." I typed back before I could stop myself. "I have what I've earned, Mom. That's enough." The typing dots blinked, then disappeared. No reply. A few minutes later, another name lit up the screen. Riley. "Can we talk?" My fingers hesitated. "About what?" "About why you're doing this. You used to care." "I still care. That's why it has to stop." 3 dots. Then nothing. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the ledger again. It looked like a map of my life, every payment a place I'd chosen to stand between them and consequence. Somewhere in all those transfers, I'd stopped being a mother and become an institution. The coffee pot clicked off the room, falling quiet. Outside, the first bus of the morning passed tires hissing on wet pavement. I thought of Paul again, his hands stained with engine grease, his calm voice when bills piled up. "Let people face their own math," he used to say. "You're not the calculator of the world." I closed the laptop. My hands trembled slightly, the skin thin and pale against the keys. For the first time in years, I felt the edges of my own life, small but intact. The house smelled faintly of coffee and rain. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was waiting. The house felt too still, the kind of stillness that makes your heartbeat sound louder than it should. I had been lying awake for hours counting the space between the creaks of the floorboards. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those messages again, my daughter's words stacked like bricks between us. By 2 in the morning, I gave up on sleep. I slipped out of bed, pulled on my robe, and padded into the kitchen. The glow from the refrigerator clock felt harsh in the dark. My laptop sat where I'd left it on the table. I opened it, and the soft hum of the screen filled the room like a confession waiting to be spoken aloud. The banking dashboard appeared cold, orderly, indifferent. I scrolled through the list of automatic transfers. Every week, small amounts left my account for someone else's comfort. Riley's car insurance, my parents' cable bill, a streaming subscription I'd added for family nights that no one had shown up for in years. I stared at the first line and pressed cancel. The confirmation window popped up. "Are you sure you want to stop this payment?" "Yes," I whispered to the screen. "I'm sure." Click. Then another. Riley's credit card. Click. Mom's grocery stipend. Click. The account my father had insisted we keep open, just in case. Click. Each sound was tiny, almost delicate. Yet my hands trembled after every one. The silence that followed each cancellation felt like breath returning to a body I hadn't realized was starving. Halfway through, my phone buzzed on the counter. The vibration made me flinch. It was a text from Riley. "You awake?" I hesitated before replying. "Yes. Why are you being like this? You always help." "That's the problem, Riley. I always help." The typing dots appeared, blinked, vanished, then came back again. "I didn't mean what I said yesterday. I just panicked. Everyone's expecting me to look perfect for prom. You wouldn't understand." "Maybe not. But I understand what being broke feels like. This isn't about money, Mom. It's about you not caring." I took a slow breath and typed, "If caring means paying, then maybe I need to learn another way." The message showed read, but no answer came. The quiet that followed was heavier than any argument we'd ever had. I went back to the laptop. My cursor hovered over the joint account my parents used. For years, I'd told myself it was temporary, just until they got back on their feet. That had been 12 years ago. I clicked into the account and froze. The balance was almost empty. My own name sat beside theirs, but I had stopped feeling like a co-owner long ago. I selected Suspend Access. Another confirmation window opened. I pressed confirm and leaned back. My breath caught in my throat, sharp but steady. A photo of Paul still hung beside the pantry. His smile looked easy. His shoulders relaxed the way they never were in the last months before he died. I remembered him fixing the broken washing machine with a laugh, saying, "You'd rather spend money than trust anyone else to handle a wrench." He'd been teasing, but the words had truth. I had always believed that fixing things meant keeping people close. But money hadn't kept anyone close. It had only taught them where to find me. The refrigerator clicked off, and for a moment, the house went silent. I looked at the screen again, my name alone beside the balance. No shared users, no linked accounts, no hidden obligations, just me. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like standing at the edge of something wide and uncharted, equal parts fear and relief. My hands ached, my shoulders stiff, but I didn't close the laptop yet. I wanted to sit with that stillness, the first honest quiet in years. Outside, a car passed through the wet street, its tires whispering against the pavement. Inside, the only sound was the soft hum of the laptop, waiting for the next click that might change my life again. The morning light was the color of paper, left too long in the rain, then washed out tired. I hadn't meant to fall asleep at the table, but my head had rested against my arm sometime after 4, the hum of the refrigerator blurring into silence. When I lifted my face, a faint imprint of the table's grain marked my cheek. My laptop screen had gone dark, the cursor a single blinking pulse. I moved the mouse, expecting only my usual rows of transactions. Instead, a notification appeared at the top corner of the screen, an email from the bank. Large withdrawal, $5,000. My heart tripped. The timestamp said 6:42 in the morning. I stared at the number until it blurred as if disbelief could make it vanish. $5,000. I hadn't withdrawn a cent. For a moment, I couldn't move. Then I clicked through to the joint account, the one I'd promised my parents would only exist for emergencies. My throat tightened. The balance had dropped like a stone. I pressed my hands to the table to steady them. My mind began to move faster than my breath. Riley. It had to be her. She'd done this before transfers for online orders, small ones I'd brushed off as mistakes. But this wasn't a mistake. $5,000 didn't vanish by accident. I reached for my phone and dialed her. 1 ring, 2. Then voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I dialed again, this time, my mother. She answered on the first ring. "Martha, it's early," she said, voice groggy. "Did you take money from the account?" A pause. "What? Why would you?" $5,000, I said. "It's gone." "You're overreacting," she said, and I could almost hear her straightening up in bed, pulling her voice into something steadier. Maybe Riley needed it. Prom, maybe some deposit. You know she's been— She didn't ask, and neither did you. She's your daughter, my mother snapped. You sound like a stranger. I ended the call before my voice could break. Rain had begun outside the steady Portland kind, slow but endless. I grabbed my coat and keys. I didn't think. I just moved. By the time I started the car, my hands were slick on the steering wheel. The windshield wipers dragged across the glass like impatient sighs. Traffic was light, only a few commuters and delivery vans gliding through puddles. My mind ran ahead of me, listing every possible explanation, every lie I wanted to believe. Maybe it was a bank error. Maybe an old automatic transfer I'd forgotten. Maybe this, maybe that, every maybe, a lifeline that kept dissolving as I held on. When I reached the bank, the glass doors were just unlocking. The young teller behind the counter looked up, startled by my urgency. "Can I help you, ma'am? I need to see a manager. There's been an unauthorized withdrawal." She nodded, quickly, led me to a small office where a man in a gray suit sat behind a desk, too clean to be trusted. His nameplate read David. "I'm sorry for the trouble," he said after hearing my story. "Let's take a look." He typed, clicked, frowned. The withdrawal was authorized through an online access point using credentials linked to the secondary user. "Secondary user?" I asked, though I already knew. "Your daughter, Riley." The air left the room. I gripped the arms of the chair, steadying myself. "Where was it transferred?" He turned the screen slightly toward me. "A payment to a card issuer. It appears to be personal debt consolidation." I stared at the line of numbers, the familiar name beside them. My voice came out low. She used my money to pay her credit cards. He hesitated. "Would you like to file a dispute?" I almost laughed. The word sounded wrong, like we were talking about a parking ticket instead of betrayal. "No, not yet. I just needed to see it." He gave me a sympathetic look, the kind people use when they know nothing can fix what they've confirmed. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. I stood under the bank's awning, watching the street blur. I didn't cry. I felt something heavier, something close to finality. Back in the car, I stared at the gray sky through the windshield. The numbers repeated in my head. $5,000. A sum, a symbol, a decision I hadn't been part of. For years, I'd given them trust the way some people give away old coats quietly, without checking if it still fit. But now I had proof printed and undeniable. And proof I was realizing doesn't heal. It only replaces hope. Ellen Ward held the door with her hip and a paper cup between her teeth. "You look like you slept in the car," she said, setting the coffee on her desk. "Sit. Tell me everything." I got an email from the bank, I said, taking the chair across from her. "Large withdrawal. $5,000. The joint account." She turned the monitor toward herself and began typing. Her movements were neat, economical, nothing wasted. Same login as last time. They said it was Riley's credentials. Ellen nodded once. "All right. We pull the full history." She angled the screen so I could see. "You still remember Paul's old password protocol?" I felt the sting behind his name. "I do." "Good. Let's use it for the archive." She clicked. A progress bar crawled across the screen. "You're sure you want to know I am done guessing?" The first page populated rows of line items, dates marching backward. Ellen slid a legal pad toward me. "You circle anything that punches you in the gut. I'll mark patterns." The top lines were familiar. Utilities, groceries, insurance. I felt a momentary wash of relief that I hated myself for needing. Then Ellen scrolled. "Luxe Boutique," she read. 3 transactions within 2 weeks. "That's a clothing store," I said. "Expensive." "Car payment," she continued. "Recurring every month. Riley doesn't own a car, Someone does. She drew a small star beside it. Here, travel agency. Deposit, then balance a month later. My parents took a trip to the coast, I said too quickly. They said my aunt had points. Ellen's pen stopped. She wrote, "Coast trip, your parents," and moved on. "Prom planner," she said, eyebrows lifting. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. A planner. For a school dance. This one's labeled consultation and styling. 2 visits, then gown alteration, then car service. She clicked to expand details. Black car, driver in a suit. I told her to earn it herself. I said, my voice dull. Ellen kept scrolling. Card issuer payment, she said. Another. Increasing amounts over a year. My name is on those cards, isn't it? Secondary authorization, she said gently. Not primary. The screen shifted to a bar graph. Months rose and fell like teeth. Let's sort by vendor, Ellen said, then by category. For the next half hour, we built a small vocabulary of hurt. Luxury retailers, electronics, restaurant tabs that looked like celebrations. A salon I had never entered. A gym. A second gym. A pet service. We did not have a pet. Every few lines Ellen murmured, there, and drew another mark. I pressed my hands flat on my knees. How much I said because the number would be easier than the sentences. Ellen brought up a summary. We should look by year first, she said, to see the slope. The totals lined up. The first year, not much. The second, more. The third, a leap. By the 5th, the column doubled. She added them with the quick calm I had admired when she and Paul worked late over his shop's taxes. Finally, she lifted her pen. The sum she said is over $100,000. The room contracted. I heard the hum of the heat vent, the faint buzz of the fluorescent light, my own pulse in my ears. $100,000. 3 words like a closing door. Ellen waited. She did not touch me. She did not offer sympathy with sharp edges. She reached for her coffee and took a quiet sip, as if to slow the moment long enough for me to breathe. I let this happen, I said. You allowed it because you believed you were protecting people, she answered. That is not the same thing as causing it. I opened the account, I said. I left it open. You trusted your family, she said. You did not consent to a blank check. I nodded, but the nod did not mean agreement. It meant I had heard her. She opened a new window and began drafting a list. Here's what we do, she said. Freeze all automatic transfers. Revoke digital access except your own. Change your passwords. Set alerts at low thresholds. Then we request copies of signed authorizations. For the cards. For everything that carries your name, she said. If there are authorizations, we examine them. If there are not, we put the bank on notice. You think I should press charges? I think you should decide where the line is, she said. My job is to help you hold it. The word line steadied me. We should also note the car payment, I said. Find out who's driving on my ledger. Ellen made a second list. We'll get those details. For now, change the passwords. Here. She turned the keyboard toward me. I typed slowly, building a new sequence only my fingers would remember. Ellen watched the screen. Good. Again for the email. Again for the phone. Again for the bank. When I finished, my hands ached. I turned my palms up. They looked like my mother's thin skin blue veins, the map of a life of useful work. Ellen slid a folder across the desk. Take this home. It has today's printouts, my notes, and a checklist. Do not respond to any messages about money. If anyone calls you, tell them you are not discussing finances without counsel. Counsel, I repeated the word formal and sturdier than I felt. She stood. This is not about punishing anyone. This is about stopping the harm. I hear you, I said. I also hear my daughter calling me selfish. She can call you what she wants. You are changing the terms. People complain when the terms change. I closed the folder. The weight of paper felt heavier than it should. "Thank you," I said. "Paul used to say you saved everyone by 3 cents and a spreadsheet." She said, a faint smile touching her mouth. "Maybe now you save yourself." I held the folder to my chest. "I am going to the bank after this. I want the alerts lowered. I want the joint access removed. I want printed statements mailed to me only. I will email you the language she said. Use it exactly." I turned to the door, then stopped. "If Riley asks me to forgive this, what do I say?" Ellen rested her hand on the back of her chair. "You tell her forgiveness is free," she said. "Access is not." I left her office with the folder tight against my ribs, the pages warm from my hands. Outside, the air smelled like wet pavement and winter. I walked to the car and set the folder on the passenger seat, as if it were a person I had promised to protect. The engine started on the first try. I pulled into traffic and drove toward the branch, watching the wipers clear the glass stroke after measured stroke. I sat at my desk with Ellen's folder open beside me, the papers still warm from the printer. Numbers filled every page, dates, balances, withdrawals. Each one a quiet theft signed with my trust. I read the totals again until they stopped meaning money and started feeling like time, like years I couldn't get back. The cursor blinked on my laptop, waiting. I opened a new message and typed to the 3 addresses that mattered: my mother, my father, and Riley. "The account is closed to you. I know about the withdrawals. I read it twice. No greeting, no signature. Just the truth." Then I pressed send. The sound was so small I almost missed it. A faint whoosh, a single key turning in a lock. The phone rang almost instantly. My mother first, then my father. Then Riley, over and over until her name filled the screen like static. I turned the phone face down and waited. The calls came again, one after another, a mechanical rhythm of panic. When the ringing stopped, the messages began. "What are you doing, Martha? You can't cut family off like this. We needed that money. You know that. Mom, answer me. Please." Then another. "Mom, this is crazy. Why would you humiliate us like this?" I closed the messages without opening the rest. My fingers shook, but not from fear. I was exhausted from years of bending. Every reply I didn't send felt like a small reclamation of breath. By noon, Ellen texted, "Did you send it?" "Yes." "Then leave it alone. Let them react. Don't explain." I left the laptop open on the table, walked to the sink, and rinsed my coffee cup. The day outside was gray again, the kind of Portland sky that swallowed sound. The house was quiet, except for the ticking of the kitchen clock, steady and calm. When the phone started again, I didn't move to answer. I watched it vibrate across the counter until it stopped. I turned the volume down until the silence returned. For the first time in years, no one could reach me. No one could ask, demand, or persuade. The quiet felt unfamiliar, too large at first. Then right, like a coat finally fitted to my shoulders. I sat back at the table, looked at the blank email window, and whispered to the screen, "Enough." The rain had let up by the time I pulled onto Evergreen Street, but the road still shone wet beneath the fading afternoon light. I hadn't been there in months, not since my parents signed the deed over to Riley, calling it her fresh start. Now it looked the same and different at once, the way familiar places do when you stop belonging to them. The front porch light was on, though it was barely 4. I parked by the curb, cut the engine, and sat for a moment watching the curtains move. My chest felt tight, not with fear, but with a strange, exhausted calm. When I knocked, it took a while before the door opened. Riley stood there in a sweatshirt and leggings, arms folded across her chest, her chin tilted just enough to make it clear I wasn't welcome. "I thought you'd call first," she said. "I thought you'd answer first," I replied. She looked past me, scanning the street, as if I'd brought someone else. "You didn't have to come all the way here. Whatever this is, it could have been a text." "I've had enough texts this week." Her mouth pressed into a flat line. You didn't have to involve Grandma and Grandpa. They're furious. They involved themselves, I said. And so did you. She stepped aside reluctantly. Fine. 5 minutes. Inside the living room still smelled faintly like the cinnamon candles I used to buy. A framed photo of Riley and my parents sat on the mantel. I wasn't in it. Nice place, I said quietly. It's mine now, she answered, almost defensive. I've been trying to fix it up. With whose money, I asked, her eyes narrowed. So this is about that email. It's about what's behind it, I said, setting my bag on the armchair. You used my account, Riley, $5,000 last week, and more before that. I told you I'd pay you back. You never said that I replied. You just assumed I'd keep saying yes. Her voice rose. Because you always do. You've never said no to me, not once. You built this life around helping everyone, and now suddenly you're what? Cold. I took a breath. I'm not cold. I'm done being convenient. She crossed her arms tighter, her tone sharper now. You think this is easy for me? You think I wanted to ask Grandma, said you had savings. She said you'd help if you actually cared. I almost laughed. Your grandmother doesn't know what caring costs. That's not fair. It's not. I agreed. But neither is stealing. Riley's eyes flickered anger, then guilt, then something like fear. I didn't steal, I borrowed. From someone who didn't agree to lend, I said. That's not borrowing. Silence stretched. The sound of rain starting again filled the space between us. Finally, she whispered, You could have called before you froze everything. And you could have asked before taking it, I said. She turned away, rubbing her arm like a child caught lying. Grandpa said you were overreacting. I'm not reacting, I said softly. I'm protecting what's left. Her head dropped. For the first time, I saw how tired she looked, the dark circles, the brittle edges of bravado. You think I don't need you, she said, her voice cracking. But I do. I know, I said. That's why this has to stop. She didn't answer. I picked up my bag and walked toward the door. My reflection followed me in the glass, smaller, older, but steadier than I remembered. As I reached the porch, she called out, Mom, wait. I turned. She opened her mouth like she wanted to speak, then closed it again. The silence between us felt heavier than words. I nodded once, a gesture of understanding, maybe mercy, maybe just fatigue, and stepped into the rain. By the time I reached the old dining table, the house already smelled like coffee and confrontation. My mother had set the table as if for a holiday. 4 mugs, napkins, folded a plate of cookies no one would touch. Riley sat at the end, scrolling her phone. My father stood by the window, arms crossed. Sit, my mother said, her tone clipped. We're going to talk about this before you make a fool of yourself any further. I think I've already been made the fool, I said, pulling out a chair. The wood creaked under me, a sound older than any of us. Riley didn't look up. You didn't have to come here making drama. I told you I'd fix it. By taking what isn't yours, I said. She rolled her eyes. It was $5,000, not $1 million. You act like I emptied your whole life. I leaned forward. It wasn't just $5,000, Riley. It was everything you've taken for granted. And I know about the credit cards, the trips, the payments that weren't yours. Her face froze, then flushed. Grandma said you wouldn't understand. My mother cleared her throat. You're overreacting. We told Riley she could use the account for a few things. We assumed you'd be fine with it. You've always helped. Without asking me, I said. Your family, she said, as if that answered everything. I took a breath, steady but sharp. Family doesn't mean free access. My father turned from the window. Don't raise your voice in this house. I'm not raising it, I said. I'm finally using it. The room stilled. Riley's phone buzzed and she silenced it. My mother's eyes narrowed. You don't air family business like this. It's embarrassing. You made it my business when you spent my income, I said. Her jaw tightened. You've always had more than you need. It's just money. No, I said, quieter now. It's my time, my work, my years. It's every late night I stayed awake making sure the bills got paid while you told me I was lucky to have steady hands. Riley looked between us, uncomfortable. You could have just told me to stop instead of freezing everything. I tried to. Years ago, I said. You didn't listen. None of you did. My father stepped closer to the table. We were drowning, Martha. You were supposed to help. I did, I said. Over $100,000 worth of help. And you still want more. Riley pushed back her chair. That number can't be right. Ellen's folder was still in my bag. I slid one sheet across the table. These are the records. It's all there. My mother picked it up, skimming the lines until the color drained from her face. This is nonsense. The bank must be wrong. It isn't, I said. It's what happens when you mistake love for a checking account. Riley's voice broke. You don't understand. Everyone expects things. Friends, schoolwork, everything costs something. I understand, I said. That's why I wanted you to learn how to earn it. You're just punishing me, she said. You like holding it over people. I stared at her for a long time. You've mistaken boundaries for punishment. That's on you. My father slammed his palm against the table, the sound sharp enough to rattle the mugs. Enough. She's your daughter. I know, I said. That's why I'm still here. The words landed heavier than I expected. My mother folded the paper and set it down. If you do this, Martha, you'll lose us. I met her eyes. Then I guess I've already paid for that, too. Riley's breath caught, but she said nothing. The room held its silence like breath before a storm. My father sat back down defeated. My mother looked away. I gathered the papers, folded them neatly, and stood. I'm closing every account tied to my name. If you need money, you'll have to earn it. The same way I did. Riley finally whispered. What am I supposed to do now? Live within what's yours, I said. And if you want my presence, it'll have to come without an invoice. No one spoke after that. The clock ticked above the mantel, filling the air where words used to live. I walked to the door, the folder pressed to my chest. Behind me, the sound of Riley's chair scraping against the floor followed me out, but she didn't speak again. I didn't look back. The house was too warm, the kind of heat that makes tempers rise faster. We were still at the dining table, the same one I'd eaten at as a child. The cookies my mother had brought out sat untouched, turning stale in the middle of the tension. Riley had been quiet since I showed her the statements. She stared down at the papers spread in front of her as if they were written in another language. My father paced near the window, while my mother sat rigid, a fixed smile that hid fury. I can't believe you printed all this, my mother said at last. Dragging your own daughter into numbers like this. It's cruel. It's truth, I said. I've paid for things I didn't even know existed. Luxury stores, trips, cars, loans, I never signed. You all had access. You all used it. Riley's head snapped up. That's not fair. I didn't know half of this. Then who did, I asked? Her silence was answer enough. My father stopped pacing. We were struggling, Martha. We thought you understood. You've always had more. I worked for more, I said. Every dollar came from nights I stayed up balancing other people's mistakes. My mother leaned forward. You're acting like we robbed you. You did. I said calm but certain. You took without asking and called it family. Riley pushed back her chair suddenly. Stop it, all of you, she looked at me. You think this makes you right? You don't get it, Mom. You live like a hermit in that condo clipping coupons and driving the same car for 20 years. You think that's something to be proud of. My hands went cold. What did you just say? I don't want to be poor like you, she said, each word deliberate. Always afraid to spend, afraid to live. You talk about sacrifices, but you've never enjoyed a single thing. You just count. The room fell silent. Even my mother stopped breathing for a moment. Riley kept going, voice rising. You gave me a life so small, I couldn't breathe in it. You think buying me shoes and lessons was love, but all you ever did was control everything. Maybe I wanted to feel rich just once. I stood slowly. My chair scraped against the floor, sharp and final. You wanted to feel rich, I repeated, and you used my life to do it. Her chin trembled, but she held my gaze. You always made me feel like I owed you something. You did, I said quietly. Respect. She looked away, the defiance cracking just enough to show the fear underneath. You'll never understand what it's like for me. I took a step closer, lowering my voice. I understand more than you think. I grew up watching my parents borrow from pride and pay with guilt. I swore I'd never live that way, but I did, for you. Riley blinked hard, anger softening into confusion. So what now? You're cutting everyone off, pretending you're better than us. No, I said. I'm done pretending love is the same as survival. My mother shot up from her chair. You're not leaving this house until you apologize for speaking to her like that. I'm not the one who should apologize, I said. And I've already said what I needed to say. My father spoke for the first time in minutes. You think this is strength, Martha? Walking away. It's selfish. It's necessary, I said. Because if I stay, I'll keep giving and you'll keep taking. Riley's voice cracked. I didn't mean what I said. Yes, you did, I said softly. And that's what hurts most. You meant it because it's true for now. But one day, when you've worked for something yourself, you'll understand what it costs. Her lips parted, but no sound came. I gathered the folder of statements, sliding the papers back inside. My mother muttered something about shame, about family, about how I'd lost my way. I let her speak until her voice turned into background noise like the hum of an old refrigerator. Riley's eyes followed me to the doorway. She looked smaller now, fragile, in a way that reminded me of the little girl who used to fall asleep on my lap during thunderstorms. At the door, I paused. You wanted to feel rich, I said. Then maybe you should learn what being rich costs. No one moved. The silence that followed felt different this time, not angry, not bitter, just empty. I stepped outside into the cool air, the folder pressed against my chest. Behind me, the house stayed still, as if waiting for someone else to speak. No one did. I walked out of the house without a word. The front door clicked shut behind me, soft but final, the kind of sound that carries more weight than shouting ever could. The air outside felt sharper than when I'd arrived, the drizzle just enough to sting my face. Halfway down the driveway, my phone buzzed again and again. I didn't look at it. I unlocked the car, slid inside, and sat with my hands on the steering wheel, waiting for the shaking to stop. Another call, then another. I finally turned the screen over. The first was from my mother, the next from Riley, then my father. All the same rhythm of panic and blame I'd heard my entire life. I pressed and held each number until the block option appeared. One tap, then another. The silence that followed was heavy but clean. Through the rain-slick windshield, I could still see the light from the living room window. 3 silhouettes moved behind the curtains, small shapes in an old house that had stopped feeling like home a long time ago. For years, I'd stood on that porch carrying groceries, checks, and small apologies. Tonight, I carried nothing. I leaned my forehead against the steering wheel, letting the quiet sink in. My hands were trembling not from anger, but from release. I had spent decades keeping everyone else's balance steady, and now that I had tipped the scale back toward myself, the air felt unrecognizable. A knock startled me. Riley stood outside the passenger window, soaked hair plastered to her cheeks. She mouthed something I couldn't hear through the glass. I lowered it halfway. "Mom," she said, voice shaking. "Please don't leave like this." I stared at her, the rain dripping from her chin, the same blue eyes that once trusted me with everything. "You said I made you feel small," I whispered. "Maybe now you can find space to grow." She looked down, biting her lip. "I didn't mean it the way it sounded." "I know," I said. but you meant enough of it to hurt." She reached toward the door handle, but I shook my head. "Not tonight." Her shoulders dropped. "Will you at least call me tomorrow when you're ready to talk?" I said. "Not to take." I rolled the window up before she could answer. Her reflection blurred in the glass, a mix of tears and rain. I started the engine, the wipers sweeping her face from view. As I pulled away, I saw her in the rearview mirror, standing still in the driveway, phone in hand, unsure whether to follow or let me go. The ache in my chest was sharp, but clean, like air after a storm. At the first red light, I caught my reflection in the window. Older, yes, but lighter too, like a weight had finally slipped from my shoulders. When the light turned green, I drove home without once checking my phone. It was nearly 3 weeks before I heard anything. The house was quiet. My days divided into simple routines: coffee, the news, the sound of rain against the porch railing. Then one afternoon, my cousin Claire called. We hadn't spoken in years. "Your parents filed for bankruptcy," she said without ceremony. "It was in the paper this morning." I pressed the phone to my ear, my pulse slow, steady. "What about Riley?" "She moved out. I think she's renting a small room downtown. She got a job at that grocery on Hawthorne, the one with the red awning." Claire hesitated. "She's trying, Martha. That's something." I thanked her, said I needed to go, and hung up. The words lingered in the air like dust bankruptcy grocery trying. I sat at the kitchen table where all this had started. The same chair, the same light. I thought of the house on Evergreen Street, the silence that must fill it now. The same walls that once heard my laughter, my parents' arguments, Riley's teenage music now echoing with absence. That night I found myself driving past it without meaning to. The yard lights were off, the windows dark. A for sale sign leaned slightly in the wet grass. I didn't stop. I just slowed enough to see the curtains drawn tight, as if the house itself was tired of being looked at. When I got home, I poured tea and sat by the window. The phone lay on the table beside me, face down. There were no new messages. I thought about Riley at a cash register somewhere, counting change, folding bills, learning the value of numbers the way I had decades ago. I pictured her tired, but standing, earning something that was finally hers. The image brought no triumph, only a dull ache that softened into peace. The next morning I opened the window and let the cold air in. It smelled of rain and pine, sharp and clean. For the first time I noticed the quiet wasn't hollow, it was spacious. I found the old folder from Ellen still tucked in a drawer. I slid the papers back inside and tied it shut with string. Then I placed it in the cabinet under the sink, the one where I keep the cleaning rags. It didn't feel like evidence anymore. It felt like closure. I whispered to the empty room. We're all paying our debts one way or another. Outside, a bus hissed along the street. Somewhere downtown, my daughter was standing behind a counter speaking to strangers, building a life, one small exchange at a time. I hoped she would keep the change. The first time I sat in Dr. Bennett's office, I almost left before she arrived. The clock on the wall ticked softly, a sound too calm for the things I carried. When she entered, she didn't ask why I was there. She just smiled and said, "You look like someone who's been taking care of everybody else." I gave a small laugh. That obvious. She settled across from me, notebook on her knee. People who apologize when they sit down usually are. We sat in silence for a moment. I stared at the carpet, the soft gray that reminded me of Oregon rain. "I don't really know how to do this," I said finally. "Talking about myself feels indulgent." "Indulgent," she repeated. "That's an interesting word. Where did you learn that caring for yourself was indulgent?" The question landed like a stone. I thought of my mother's voice, sharp and certain. "Good daughters don't complain. Good daughters give what they can." "My mother," I said quietly. "She used to tell me I was lucky to be useful." Dr. Bennett wrote something down. "And being useful became your way of earning love." I nodded. I gave because I thought it meant belonging. I paid for things, solved problems, filled the cracks. I thought that was love. And when did it stop feeling like love? When they stopped saying thank you. She looked up from her notes. Or maybe when you started noticing that they never meant it. I let out a shaky breath. I'm angry, but also guilty for being angry. That guilt, she said gently, belongs to the little girl who learned that her worth depended on keeping everyone happy. I stared at the floor again. So what do I do with her? Dr. Bennett smiled. You listen to her. She's the one who's been trying to get your attention all along. The next week, I brought a box of old journals to our session ledgers of my own making. Years of lists, budgets, notes about who needed what. She flipped through a few pages, then looked up. You've documented your entire life through responsibility, she said. But where's the part about you? I guess I left that column blank, I said. Dr. Bennett leaned forward. You've built a life around fixing. But if you stop fixing others, who fixes you? Her words stayed with me long after I left the office. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with one of the old journals open in front of me. For the first time, I didn't write bills or chores. I wrote a list of small things I wanted that had nothing to do with anyone else: a walk by the river, a new book dinner out by myself, maybe even a trip someday. The page looked strange without numbers beside the words. Just intentions. Quiet, unmeasured ones. When I closed the notebook, I felt something new. Not relief, not forgiveness, but space. The next session, Dr. Bennett asked how I felt. I told her I was learning to breathe without calculating who needed the air first. She smiled and said, "That's where healing begins." I believed her. For once, I let the silence that followed feel like enough. The envelope was thin, the kind of paper you can tell has been handled too many times. My name was written in Riley's hurried scrawl letters, leaning into one another, as if even her handwriting was afraid of standing alone. There was no return address, just a smudge of ink near the corner. I sat at the table and turned it over in my hands. For a moment, I considered not opening it. But the silence in the house made it impossible to pretend I wasn't waiting for something. I slid a knife along the edge and pulled the letter free. It began without a greeting. You made me feel like I was never enough. My breath caught. I read it again slower. You always talked about sacrifice, about everything you gave up for me. But it never felt like love, Mom. It felt like debt. Like I owed you for being born. The words blurred at the edges. I set the paper down, pressing my palms against it to keep it still. I'm not saying you didn't care. I know you did. You showed it in your way. Money advice rules, but you never just saw me. You saw the version of me you wanted: responsible, polite, grateful. I tried to be that. I really did. But I was always afraid of disappointing you. The handwriting grew messier toward the end, the ink darker where tears or frustration had pressed harder into the page. I'm angry, but I don't hate you. I don't know how to forgive you yet, or if you'll ever forgive me. I just needed to say this before it turns into something worse. Riley. I read it 3 times. Each time the words shifted. Blame, confession, plea. By the third, all I could feel was how young her voice still sounded. I folded the letter carefully, smoothing the creases, as if they could soften what was written. I wanted to respond, to tell her she had been enough, even when she made it impossible to say so. But every sentence I thought of felt like an argument disguised as love. The clock in the hallway ticked, each second louder than the last. I reached for the drawer beside the sink, the one filled with things I didn't know how to throw away. Birthday cards, Paul's old pen, a photo of Riley as a toddler with chocolate on her chin. I slid the letter inside and taped a small label to the front: someday. Not today. Not tomorrow. But someday, when the ache felt less sharp and the air between us less heavy. For now, I let the drawer close quietly. The sound it made was small, but final enough to hold the space that words could not. The community center smelled faintly of old carpet and coffee, the kind of place where hope shows up wearing practical shoes. I'd started volunteering there 2 months after the letter arrived one afternoon, a week helping young women write resumes and fill out applications. That morning, the coordinator, Denise, handed me a clipboard. "We've got a new one today," she said. 17. Smart but guarded. Reminds me of someone I know. When Marcy walked in, I understood. She was all edges and defiance, chipped nail polish, a denim jacket too thin for the weather. She didn't sit until I nodded to the chair across from me. "I don't know why I'm here," she said. "They said it looks good on college applications." "Then let's make it look good," I said. She smirked, surprised I hadn't lectured her. "You sound like my English teacher." "Lucky for you, I'm worse. I used to be an accountant." That earned a laugh. Small but real. We started with the basics: education, part-time jobs, volunteer hours. She rolled her eyes at every question, but she answered. When I asked what she wanted to do, her voice softened. Design clothes, maybe? Something that makes people feel different than they are. "That's not foolish," I said. "That's art, with purpose." "No one calls it that when you're broke," she muttered. The sentence hit harder than she knew. I could almost hear Riley's voice in her tone, that same mixture of pride and resentment. I leaned forward. "You know being broke isn't the same as being small. Sometimes it's where you start learning who you are." Marcy stared at me for a long moment. "You talk like someone who's had to start over." "I have," I said quietly. She didn't push, and I didn't offer more. We kept working until her resume took shape. The stubbornness faded into focus, her ambition filling the spaces between bullet points. When we finished, she looked at the page and smiled, nervous, proud. "It doesn't look like me," she said. "It looks like who you're becoming." She folded the paper carefully, then glanced at me. "You're like the mom I wish I had." The words caught me off guard. My throat tightened before I could answer. I forced a smile. "You probably have no idea how much that means." "I mean it," she said. Serious now. "You don't talk down to people. You just listen." I looked down at my hands, the same hands that once signed every check, every apology. Maybe that's something I finally learned to do. When she left, I stayed at the table a few minutes longer, staring at her empty chair. The afternoon light fell across the papers warm and clean. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like someone who had lost her family. I felt like someone beginning to build another kind, one word, one page, one girl at a time. It happened on a quiet Saturday morning while I was cleaning the closet. I wasn't looking for memories, just space. I'd promised myself to finally get rid of the boxes stacked against the wall, old clothes, receipts, things that had lingered too long. Near the bottom, I found the dress. It was wrapped in plastic, untouched since the day I bought it. Pale blue satin, delicate beading at the waist, still carrying that faint scent of department store perfume. I remembered standing at the counter years ago, Riley beside me, her excitement sharp and bright. She'd begged for it. "It's the one, Mom, please," and I'd said yes before even checking the price tag. It cost nearly half a month's rent back then. I told myself it was worth it. I wanted her to feel special, to have the night I never did. She never wore it. I sat down on the floor with the dress across my lap. The fabric shimmered under the dim light, soft and heavy, like regret made tangible. I thought about that year, the endless arguments, the money I kept transferring, the silence that filled our home. The dress had been a promise, one we both broke in different ways. When the phone rang, I almost didn't answer. It was Denise from the nonprofit. "We're collecting donations for the community thrift shop," she said. "Formal wear, prom dresses, anything like that." I looked at the gown in my lap. I might have something, I told her. The thrift shop sat on the corner of Burnside, a narrow storefront with a bell that jingled too loudly when you walked in. A young clerk smiled from behind the counter. "Donations go on the rack to the left," she said. I carried the dress, carefully smoothing the plastic over it, as if it still belonged to someone who would care for it. The clerk paused when she saw it. "It's beautiful," she said. "Someone's going to love this." "I hope so," I said. When I handed it over, I felt a strange pull, small but deep. I walked outside before the feeling could change my mind. Later that afternoon, I passed by the shop again. The window display had been rearranged, and the dress hung in the center beneath a soft light. I stopped, caught off guard by how new it looked. A few minutes later, two girls stepped inside, laughing, pointing at different racks. One of them, maybe 16, lifted the blue gown from the display and held it against herself. She turned to the mirror and twirled the fabric, catching light as she spun. Her laughter filled the air, bright and effortless. Through the glass, I could see her mother watching from the doorway, smiling. The woman looked tired the way all mothers look when they're still giving more than they have, but there was joy there, too. Simple, uncomplicated joy. The girl said something I couldn't hear, and the mother nodded, pulling out her wallet. The clerk took the dress to the counter. I stayed on the sidewalk, hands in my coat pockets. For the first time, the sight didn't sting. It felt right. The dress had found its moment, even if it was years late. I walked home slowly. In the reflection of passing windows, I saw a woman I almost recognized, older, yes, but lighter somehow. The kind of woman who finally understood that love doesn't live in things kept too long, but in what you're willing to release. By the time I reached my street, the afternoon light had turned golden. The air felt softer, almost forgiving. I realized I was still smiling. The past, it seemed, had finally found someone else to fit. The message came on an ordinary Tuesday morning, the kind that felt almost too quiet. I was drinking coffee, half listening to the radio, when my phone buzzed once on the table. The screen showed her name. For a moment, I didn't move. We hadn't spoken in weeks. Not since the day at the house, not since the silence that came after. My hands hesitated before I unlocked the phone. Mom, I got into community college. I'm paying for it myself. No emoji, no small talk, just those 2 sentences. I read them twice, then again. My first reaction wasn't pride or even relief. It was disbelief, the kind that makes your heart stumble before it catches up. I typed, then deleted, then typed again. I'm proud of you. I stared at the words, unsure if I should add more. Maybe she didn't want more. Maybe she just wanted me to know. The phone stayed in my hand, heavy with all the things we hadn't said. I could almost hear her voice, quick, defensive, afraid of sounding weak. I pictured her in that small apartment downtown, a stack of forms on the table, the hum of a cheap refrigerator in the background. She must have done it herself, applications, deadlines, fees. My chest tightened with something close to awe. She had done it without me. A minute later, the screen lit again. Thanks, that was all. But it was more than I'd expected. I set the phone down, my eyes stinging in a way I didn't try to hide. The kitchen clock ticked, the radio whispered something about rain later in the week. Ordinary sounds made softer somehow. I whispered to the quiet, that's all I ever wanted. It wasn't about college. It never had been. It was about her standing up, choosing something, owning it. About seeing her try again, this time with her own 2 hands. I made another cup of coffee, the motion steady now. When I sat down, the phone was still on the table screen, black. I didn't need to check it again. Somewhere she was starting over, and this time she hadn't needed my help to begin. Spring came slowly that year, as if the city itself was afraid to believe in new beginnings. The cherry trees on my street had started to bloom, soft pink petals scattered across the sidewalk, like small reminders that time was still moving forward. I sat by the window with a cup of tea and my notebook open. The same notebook I used in therapy, the same one filled with messy handwriting and half-finished thoughts. Tonight, the page was blank. For once, that didn't feel like failure. It felt like space. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. Outside, the rain began again, gentle, rhythmic, the kind that never quite interrupts, only reminds you that you're alive enough to listen. I thought of Riley. Somewhere across town, maybe she was studying, maybe working late. I hadn't heard from her in 2 weeks, But the last message had been enough. It wasn't the silence of resentment anymore. It was distance that held room for growth. The pen moved in my hand before I realized I'd started writing. Love isn't quiet because it's weak. It's quiet because it's learned. The words came easily, as if they'd been waiting for me to stop rushing toward forgiveness and just let it arrive on its own. I set the pen down and smiled. The sentence wasn't perfect, but neither was I. That was the point. The porch light switch was beside the door. For years, I'd left that light on whenever Riley went out at night. It had been my silent promise, no matter how late, there would always be a way back. Even when she stopped coming home, I kept it lit out of habit. Unable to admit it had turned from hope to habit, I stood, walked to the door, and flicked the switch. The bulb glowed against the rain. This time I didn't turn it on for anyone's return. I turned it on to see myself, to remember that I was still here, still learning what peace sounded like when no one else was in the room. The rain grew steadier, tapping against the window like soft applause. I thought about all the nights I'd waited for calls, for apologies, for understanding, and how somehow this quiet felt fuller than any of those expectations ever had. The notebook lay open on the table, the words glimmering faintly in the lamplight. I added one more line beneath them. When they finally learn to walk their own path, let the light be yours again. I closed the notebook gently and sat back by the window. The city lights flickered beyond the mist, and for the first time in a long while, I felt both small and steady in the same breath. The porch light burned through the drizzle, a single patient glow in the dark. I didn't know how long I would keep it on. Maybe forever. Maybe just tonight. But either way, it was enough.